You're watching Inform TV, Alexandria, Minnesota. Welcome to Inform TV. I'm Ellen Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota. Today, this 21st day of February 2015, we're going to take a look at a speaker that's going to talk at the 7th Congressional District Republican Convention in Redwood Falls. And we're going to show some clips on his views of various issues. And this is not a Republican, Democrat, or Independent issue. I think it's more about, does this person represent the values of the 7th Congressional District? Or does he have the wherewithal to see that we address our problems of the day? And to do that, is his approach the right way to do it? Now, in the 7th Congressional District, this is truly an area that supports the right to bear arms. They're very supportive to our military, our police, our firefighters, our veterans. And yet, at the same time, I don't want you to get confused about those issues. I want you to listen in depth to what Mr. Rhodes has to say about how we would best address some of the challenges our governments and governments of the world face today with our war on radical Islam. And here is some of the notes from the 7th Congressional District Convention. It says the 2015 7th Congressional District Convention schedule is for April 17th and 18th in the Redwood Area Convention Center, Redwood Falls, Minnesota. And it talks about on Friday evening, they'll have the typical social hour from 6 to 7, and a special guest banquet speaker, Stewart Rhodes, from 7 to 9 p.m., questions and answers to follow as well. And then it goes on to say, the 2015 District Convention banquet speaker will be Stewart Rhodes from a group called Oath Keepers. And Oath Keepers is a very key word in this whole video that you're going to watch for about an hour here with various points from him, and I'll break in to make a few comments. The night of the banquet is April 17th in Redwood Falls at the Redwood Area Convention Center. The convention begins the next day at 9 a.m. And please check out the website and YouTube I copied below for information about Stewart and his group. And that's what I did in today's program, to give you some insight on what this person believes we should do to keep America safe and to have the values that America was founded on and exists on today. And that's the challenge of these videotapes, presentations that Mr. Stewart has had in the past, and some were 2009, 2010, but I've also found one on YouTube in September of 14, which wasn't very long ago. And then it goes on to say, Oath Keepers are a group of former military, police, and firefighters who believe in keeping the oath of the Constitution. And I know a lot of people in Minnesota are strong constitutional believers. Representative Bachman was a prime example. And then it says, they call themselves the Guardians of the Republic. And when you listen to these various video clips, I want you to be thinking, is this who you want to be the guardian of the Republic as far as the issues we face here in the United States and around the world with our challenges of dealing with radical Islam, dealing with communism in China, their views, the Russian situation, the disastrous economics in Europe, in Japan, as well as here when we talk about a national debt of $18 trillion, a budget that is not being balanced rather than, and we have a political system here to see, seems to be that the goal of the Republicans or the Democrats is we want to be in power and we want to strengthen our power, yet the economics of today are shaky on all corners of the world behind me here. And then it goes on to say, Some of the Oath Keepers were down in Ferguson, Missouri during the riots there last fall. It will be very interesting to hear what Stewart has to say about that. And he also talks about the Bundy Ranch in one of these clips. And I truly understand the challenges that the 7th Congressional District Republican leadership has. They responded to me that they tried to look at some of the national figures in the Republican Party to come in and be keynote speakers. The cost was $25,000 or more, and they said that was obviously not in their budget, and so they kind of went down the line, and Mr. Rhodes was willing to come for strictly expenses, so they chose him. And I, in a previous life, as they say, I was involved in some political things, and so I fully understand the challenges they have, the Democrats have. It's an issue. But when you listen to Mr. Rhodes here, I want you to think, is this the type of person that the Republicans should be seeking out? Now, my own views are, with coming with this incredible election process in 2016, is that we need to find a Rex Tillerson type, chairman of the Exxon, to be the Republicans' candidate forebearer for the party. I think we're in a position that the world needs a great president more than ever. Our country needs a great president more than ever. And the Republicans, historically being the party of business, well, I think it's time the Republicans need to look at a leader that has dealt with the world. I think the Democrats need to start looking at that we have leaders that in their everyday life have dealt with the global economy and know the leaders of the world. And I don't think there's anybody better than Rex Tillerson, chairman of Exxon, that's dealt with energy issues, dealt with political issues, understands what it takes to move and get something done, not just in a United States basis with our political process, but with the various governments of the world, or a Rex Tillerson type. And at the same time, I think the Republicans of the 7th Congressional District need to be focusing on some of the business leaders within the 7th Congressional District. And my own view here, Susan Marvin would be a prime candidate that I would prefer to see that they have as an independent press person that leans to the right of getting somebody like Susan Marvin to address the convention and seek out people like that have, not like we did here with our Senate convention, a hedge fund manager or a Romney with a hedge fund manager, but rather a true business person such as Rex Tillerson, a Susan Marvin, that actually has to turn out a product and distribute that product, deal with labor, and has a good background and reputation of working with people that are competent and get paid a fair wage, and understand that as a true American corporation, you have an obligation to see that your employees do well. And with that, I want you to listen to this first portion of the Oath Keepers of Mr. Stewart and his view. And
my name is Stewart Rhodes. I'm the founder of Oath Keepers. We all are Americans. We all share a common ground of our Declaration and our Constitution, and in particular our Bill of Rights. That's our common ground. Our mission is simply to use the First Amendment to reach out and remind all active duty military, police, and firefighters of their civic obligation, of their legal duty and responsibilities under Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. The oath is not a good idea or some tradition that we just do. It's a requirement. It's a legal requirement. So our mission is simply to remind them of that oath, of the fact that it is to the law. The oath is to the highest law of the land. In this country, the Constitution reigns, not some man or woman. It's not an oath to an individual. Now, the founders were no dummies. They did this for a good reason. Throughout history, the oath was to the king, because who owned the country? The king owned the country, right? Divine right of kings. So, of course, the oath was to a person. And even in modern times, even after the fall of monarchy, you had an oath to individuals. The oath in Nazi Germany was to the Fuhrer. You know, the oath was I swear to obey the Fuhrer and give my life for the Fuhrer. Now, why was that? Because in that country, in Nazi Germany, Hitler's word was law. He opened his mouth, law emanated. That's what a dictator is. He dictates just by talking. He opens his mouth, he becomes law. He is the law. He is the nation. So the oath is to him. In this country, in sharp contrast, the oath is to no man, to no woman, to no individual. Now, why is that? Because we live under the rule of law, not of men. That's what a republic is. And it's not a democracy. You look in the Constitution, you'll never see the word democracy used anywhere in there, nor in the Declaration of Independence. It's nowhere to be found. Yes, the government is established by the consent of the people, as the Declaration makes clear, deriving its just powers from their consent. But it's not majority rule. That's what democracy is. Democracy is 51% get to tell the 49% what to do absolutely. No restraints on their power. No limitations. In such a system as that, as Madison pointed out, the minority, whether it be a racial minority, whether it be a cultural or religious minority, or a political minority, the minority is up a creek without a paddle, because the majority can reign over them and tyrannize over them at will in a real democracy. A real democracy is what put Socrates to death. They don't like the way he was talking to the youth, they put him to death by vote. That's what a democracy is. Or as some had said, a democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. Okay? The minority will always fare worse of any kind in a democracy. That's why the founders set up a constitutional republic. Now, what that means is it's a republic in the sense of representatives and also in the sense of multiple sovereignties coming together, the multiple states. But even above them, when they send someone to Washington, D.C. as a representative, they don't go there and just do what they want. It's not a representative democracy. They don't just rule by majority rule. They pass legislation by majority rule. But what's higher than legislation? The Constitution. So the Constitution is the highest law of the land, not the will of Congress on any vote. If their rule, if their law that they pass is contrary to the Constitution, as the Supreme Court has said many times, it is null and void, as if never enacted in the first place. A law contrary to the Constitution is null and void, has no force of law. A law that violates freedom of speech, for example. A law that bans criticism of the president, for example, like the Alien and Seditious Acts. And in that turmoil and anxiety over perceived domestic enemies aiding foreign enemies, like we have now, you had anxiety and a desire there to be able to reach out and stop the criticism of political opponents. And they passed the Alien and Seditious Acts, which were a direct violation of the First Amendment, almost immediately after it was enacted. Pretty sad history, frankly. This is what happens in times of trouble and turmoil and fear, is people will react by trying to tear down the constitutional barriers and get at their political opponents. So there's an example right there of a statute that was passed that was in violation, clear violation of the First Amendment. Hopefully, you will have legislatures who won't dare pass such a statute. They should look at every bill and take personal responsibility for making a determination of whether or not that legislation that's been proposed, that bill, whether or not it complies with the Constitution. Isn't that correct? Should they make an individual decision about that? And yet, all too often, Congress and other legislatures will defer that decision to the courts. They'll just vote on whatever they think is right, leaving it to the courts to sort out whether it's constitutional. Now, is that in keeping with their oath? How is that supporting the Constitution of the United States? It's not. So, that's why I started this organization, because I understand, looking at history, that you can't count on the political process to always keep violations from happening, nor can you always count on the courts, as the Alien and Sedition Acts show. This is what happens with courts also during times of emergency. During World War II, you had Korematsu, which was the case that upheld the internment of over 100,000 citizens of the United States of Japanese descent, the court figured out some way to explain away that as being necessary for national survival. Now, where'd they get that? Is that in the Constitution? That if the nation's survival is at stake, according to the court, that they can give a pass to something that otherwise would be obviously unconstitutional? No, it's not. There's no escape clause in the Constitution for government to do whatever it thinks it needs to do of any branch, including the judicial branch, whenever they feel like they have to do it. It doesn't exist. But yet, in times of emergency, it happens. As corrupt and rotten as professional politicians are, and as corrupt and rotten as the party leadership is, sad to say, in almost every state on both parties, the rank and file out there, the people of this country, still have principles, and are still willing to do what's right. So I looked at that and said, well, holy cow, let's stop worrying about what's going on with these people up here. Let's stop going to the political elites hat in hand, asking them to respect the Constitution, to respect the boundaries, to respect our rights. Instead, let's go around them. Let's ignore them for a while. Well, not entirely, but let's focus our effort on each other, on making sure that we are constitutionalists, making sure that we honor our oaths. And by doing so, whatever they decide they're going to do in their little secret meetings in a smoke-filled room or whatever they're doing, they can't enforce that. They can't put that upon us without our consent. And for too long, people have assumed that the police will just do whatever they're told. They have assumed that the military will just do whatever they're told. Because in our constitutional ignorance, we have forgotten about the oath. A common bond of brotherhood and sisterhood, all willing to give their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. That's what this organization is about, is to heal those divisions, to heal those fears, to break down those false walls, to reunite the American people with their fellow citizens who are police and military, and to reacquaint them with us. Make it very clear to them, we got your back. We support you, so long as you keep your oath. We do want the military and police to keep their oath. We'd like them all to keep their oaths. But the focus on the military and police is precisely because we see the dishonor and the deviousness among politicians and judges who would violate their oaths. And we want to make sure that if they willfully violate their oaths, it won't be the end of our republic. Plain and simple. Okay? Whenever that comes, if that day comes, we want it to be a thing where they go, look, we can't do it. All these people are saying that they're going to keep their oaths. Just keep your oath. And it's not to the 10 orders we will not obey. That's a teaching tool. Those are examples that we think, if you disagree, fine. Just be sincere in your defense. Know the Constitution, and then have the personal integrity and honesty in dealing with each other and everybody else. It's your conduct that's going to matter. Like Washington said, on the eve of the Battle of Long Island, that's the quote we use, he said, the future of this nation, whether Americans will be free, whether their children will be free, depends upon the conduct of this army. That's what he said. Well, for all of us, all the American people, whether our children will be free depends upon our conduct. Not just in capacity as oath keepers or police or military or whatever we are, as Americans. It's our responsibility. So that's why in this organization, the bedrock is goodwill, it's integrity, it's honesty, and it's civility. And we insist upon it. This is what Americans do. You step up. You don't wait for somebody else to do it. You see something that needs to be done, you step up and you do it. And that's our mission here with Oath Keepers, is to make sure that we remind those in service about their obligations under that civic duty.
In this next clip, do you believe our firefighters, our soldiers, and our police should disobey these 10 orders?
No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
Every service member has an obligation, not just that they can refuse a legal order or an unlawful order. They have an obligation to. They have to. And so they have to make a decision for themselves where that line is.
There's no earthly answer that anyone can understand why these people, after 6 days, are still in this filthy, miserable convention center. Why are they still here? There's the freeway here. I tell you what I would have done. What I would still do, I would say, let them walk out of here. Let them walk away from the filth. Let them walk away from the devastation. Let them walk away from the dead bodies in here.
They won't let them walk out of there because I'm standing right above that convention center. And what they've done is they've locked them in there. The government said, you go here and you'll get help. Or you go in that Superdome and you'll get help. And they didn't get help. They got locked in there, and they watched people being killed around them, and they watched people starving, and they watched elderly people not get any medicine. And now they know it's happening because we've been telling them repeatedly over and over every day. And you know what they're doing now? And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm telling you what's happening. They have set up a checkpoint at the bottom of this bridge. This is the bridge that takes you from New Orleans over into Gretna, from Orleans Parish into Jefferson's Parish. It's the only way out. It's the connection to the rest of the world. And they've set up a checkpoint, and anyone who walks up out of that city now is turned around. You are not allowed to go to Gretna, Louisiana from New Orleans, Louisiana. Over there, there's hope. Over there, there's electricity. Over there, there's food and water. But you cannot go from there to there. I think the government will not allow you to do it. It's a fact.
I don't know, man. Let them walk out of here. Let them walk the hell out of here. Let them get on that interstate and walk someplace.
We had Walmart deliver 3 trucks of water, trailer trucks of water. FEMA turned them back. They said we didn't need them. This was a week ago. We had 1,000 gallons of diesel fuel on a Coast Guard vessel docked in my parish. The Coast Guard said, come get the fuel right away. When we got there with our trucks, they got a word. FEMA says, don't give you the fuel. Yesterday, FEMA comes in and cuts all of our emergency communication lines. They cut them without notice. Our sheriff, Harry Lee, goes back in, he reconnects the line, he posts armed guards on our line and says no one's getting near these lines.
That's why we issued our declaration of 10 orders that we will not obey. And what those are designed to do is to get the troops thinking ahead of time about where their line in the sand is in advance. And that's what we're hearing in feedback from people in National Guard units is that in Katrina, that's kind of what happened, is the police and the military there, the National Guardsmen, were caught off guard and really hadn't thought about it in advance.
Walking up and down these streets, you don't want to think about the stuff that you're going to have to do. Somebody pops around the corner.
Be shooting in America.
Yeah.
And what we're hearing is that it won't be the same way next time. That there'll be more who will say, no, I'm not going to do that.
The next clip is from an interview from a press person at CPAC, and I want you to think about when he references the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Should we be looking at those great documents in the way he references those, as if we were in the same situation or point of time of our country as our forefathers were faced? I think times have changed dramatically, and we have to look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as they relate to today. But I want you to give your thoughts.
Hey, it's Bill Whittle here again at CPAC 2010, and I'm here with a very interesting gentleman who's the subject of a bit of a controversy lately. I'm here with Stewart Rhodes. Stewart is a spokesman for Oath Keepers, and Oath Keepers is a group of people, organization of people, who have sworn an oath to the Constitution of the United States, either as a former military man or as a firefighter, police officer, that kind of thing.
Current serving military, police, firefighters, or veterans of those services. That's correct.
So you are dealing with a group of people that some people have called the sheepdogs. You're the people that take care of and protect the body of people that make up the American citizenry.
The guardians of the people and the republic.
Okay, so people who are given that kind of authority swear an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States.
That's correct.
And you have formed this organization, and you have a list of oaths, a list of orders that you will not obey.
That's right.
Some of them are, we will not obey orders to impose martial law, we will not obey orders to detain American citizens as unlawful enemy combatants, all of these anti-tyrannical type of things.
This top one.
We will not obey orders to disarm the American people.
Right.
Now, some people are trying to portray this as a radical, dangerous, right-wing nut job kind of thing. But I look at these orders and I think back to the founders and those of us who study the founding of the Constitution in the United States and our foundational principles. I get the feeling the founders would look at this list and they would just simply go, well, duh.
Right, exactly.
Duh. Of course not.
Yeah, and they had their own list of shall nots also. It was called the Bill of Rights,
right,
which was a reflection of their history of abuse of government, and they intended to make sure it didn't happen again. All we're really doing is saying, yes, we're reaffirming the principles in the Bill of Rights, and that these are the lines that should not be crossed, and these are what governments have done throughout history, and we've added on some examples from the 20th century, such as the internment of the Japanese Americans, which happened right here, and gun confiscation during Katrina, which happened very recently. So I don't know why that's so conspiratorial.
We will not obey any order to blockade American cities, thus turning them into giant concentration camps. Now, people on the left are trying to portray this as sort of a call to militia action in the beginning of a revolution and so on, but there's nothing proactive in this list. This is a list of things that you will not do. This is not a list of things that you're going to go and do.
It's very Gandhi-like. So we're just not going to do this.
Not going
Civil
to do
disobedience. And actually, it's also the obligation that every police officer and military personnel should already know. It's established law in the military law that they must disobey an unlawful order. Remember back during the Nuremberg trials, right?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Following orders is not an excuse.
Right, precisely.
That's right.
It didn't work for Lieutenant Calley either.
It did not. And the great pride of the American military is that each individual soldier from the top commanding major general down to the lowest buck private is not obligated to follow an order that is an illegal order, or is that an order?
Right.
Okay.
And in fact, he's obligated to disobey it. He could be tried and convicted if he follows an order that's unlawful.
So now let's get down to the brass tacks, Stewart. It seems to me that these are fairly obvious things, and you would think that most soldiers would say, well, of course I'm not going to confiscate guns from the American people. Of course I'm not going to put American people in detention camps. What is it about the current political climate that got you guys to the point where you feel you have to form an organization and make it clear? Because this obviously is, this list of orders is not for your internal use. This is to say to the government, don't get any funny ideas, because we're just not going to do this. Is that a fair statement?
It's also an education tool. I can't take for granted that police and military understand the Constitution and understand the importance of their oath. They might not know, and quite a few of them don't, that the oath is actually required in the Constitution itself in Article 6. It's a mandate from the founders that the oath and the allegiance is to the people and to their constitution, not to a person or to an office like the King of England as it was traditionally. Right. The founders broke that tradition of being vowed to obey a person, and instead they said, hey, the supreme law of the land here is not the king, not a person, not the president, it's the Constitution itself. And now why did we do this? Well, we looked at the very recent history of Katrina. There you had house-to-house disarmament of average American citizens who were not looters. They were just simply people trying to maintain their own safety in their own homes or while evacuating. And they were disarmed. And you also had confinement in the Superdome. People were put in there, as was seen on Fox News, Shepard Smith talking about it on Fox News. They were not allowed to cross out, not allowed to cross the bridge he was standing on. There was a blockade put in place. They were kept inside. And so you had two examples right there in recent history.
So it probably bears illuminating that while many people on the progressive left want to paint you as a bunch of right-wing screaming nutcases, this is in a response to something that happened under the administration of George W. Bush. This is not about an anti-Obama movement. It's not an anti-Democratic Party movement. It is we understand what the limits on the federal power should be, and sometimes the federal government apparently doesn't, and therefore we have this list of orders that we're not going to obey if they should be issued to us.
Exactly. And in fact, an article I wrote for SWAT magazine 2 years ago talked about the importance of the oath. This is long before we knew who was going to be president in this last election. And one of the things that really got me during the Bush administration years was the claimed power of the president to detain even an American citizen as though they were a foreign combatant in Iraq or Afghanistan. The claim was he could detain you or I as an enemy combatant without due process at all. No indictment, no jury trial. I think it's very dangerous.
Yes, and you're not taking the reverse position. You're not saying that American rights should be granted to illegal combatants who are actually illegal foreign national combatants.
Sure, but the American, there is a line of separation between us and them.
Categorically.
Citizens, absolutely. I mean, Scalia said this in the Hamdi dissent. You look at the Hamdi case, in Scalia's dissent, he is spot on. He says, with an American, you can do that with a foreign enemy. With an American citizen, you must try them for treason. That's what you do with a person who makes war on their own nation. And so I saw that under the Bush administration as a very dangerous trend. But now all those powers that were put in place and all these claims of authority that were aimed at radical Islamic terrorism are now being swung inward.
Yeah, that's
Who
right.
are the people that are being considered to be potential terrorists nowadays by DHS?
Yeah, former military people, militia
Ron Paul
groups,
supporters,
all that.
Chuck Baldwin supporters,
Absolutely.
all that, yeah.
So I have two quick
Tea
questions.
partiers too,
there
by
you
the
go.
way.
I know. Two quick questions for you.
Sure.
Number one, it's been a remarkable year in American politics, to say the least. We have seen the federal government nationalize entire industries, things that many of us who have been students of America simply would not imagine we'd ever live to see, let alone see in a year.
Right, exactly.
Do you find that is driving your membership, or at least interest in your organization, the events of this last year with this new administration and their strong belief in a very powerful federal government?
Oh, absolutely. And it's also the part of the cycle of politics. When it was Bush doing it, the Democrats, liberals were quoting Benjamin Franklin and quoting the Constitution and calling him unconstitutional. Now that it's flipped, now you have more conservatives waking up and going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that these powers are in the hands of the president. But also Obama has reinforced those fears by calling returning veterans potential terrorist threats and by nationalizing GM and doing these huge bailouts for the banks and trying to nationalize healthcare. I mean, he's acting as though he is doing a scorched earth socialist program as fast as he possibly can.
And what do you think the objective is of those people who are trying to portray Oath Keepers as a right-wing paramilitary revolutionary movement that's calling for armed insurrection against the lawful governments of the United States?
Well,
what do you think they're trying to achieve?
Well, I think they feel threatened. They feel their agenda is threatened by us reminding Americans of the core bedrock we all have, which is the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. If we all come together and stand on that common ground and defend that common ground, they cannot transform America. But if they can divide and conquer us and marginalize us and make us afraid to talk about our own heritage and about the very plain fact that the Constitution mandates that oath and what that means, they don't want the veterans, for example, to wake up and realize that to keep my oath as a veteran, I must only support constitutionalists for office. If I support an oath breaker, I am breaking my oath. That's a message that's a threat to their political goals. So, I mean, what else could they be afraid of? Wouldn't they want someone to keep fidelity to their promises?
You would think
to
so.
follow the supreme law of the land?
The oath is to the Constitution. It's not to a party. It's not to an individual.
Right.
And I am extremely wary of invoking Godwin's law on anything. But I will tell you this as a student of history: the moment that Nazi Germany became Nazi Germany, the moment that Adolf Hitler gained the power to do what he did, was the moment that he determined that Army, Air Force, and Navy officers in the German population had to suddenly take an oath to him personally.
That's right.
That oath went from being an oath to the German people to an oath to him personally. That's what gave him the power to achieve everything else.
Right.
And I think that's really what all of us who learn the lessons, or at least try to learn the lessons of history, are afraid of. We just simply are aware that this has happened in the past. We're not saying it's happening now, but we're saying we're keeping our eyes on it.
Exactly, and the founders understood that, and that's why they had experienced history, they were students of history, and that's why they made sure the oath was to the Constitution itself, not to an office, not to a man.
If people are interested in Oath Keepers, Stewart, where can they go?
You can go to oathkeepers.org, and we have testimonials there from veterans and current serving who send in what their oath means to them. They can read those, those are very stirring, and they can also submit their own testimonial, and we have 50 state forums that can go join and participate in anything Oath Keepers does.
Well, for the other 10,000 assorted right-wing revolutionary nut jobs here at CPAC 2010, I'm Bill Whittle.
The next clip now is with what many call the political god of old white men, especially here in the 7th Congressional District, of some of the people that I've talked to that have cable or have dish and religiously watch Bill O'Reilly on a nightly basis. Yet for you Republicans that tend to do that, I would contend that for 14 years he's been the top cable personality and program, yet when we look at this century, the 21st century, some of the disastrous economics that have taken place, and he may be a very entertaining and some interesting thought process, but when we look at the world, we look at the challenges the world faced from Islam, the challenges the world suddenly is facing from Russia, from China, and economics around the world, whether it's the debt in Japan, the debt crisis in Europe, or the debt crisis here. We have somebody that maybe is a good talker, but certainly isn't leading to true resolution of the issues. And at the same time, he's a darling of the Tea Party. And so with this, I want you to listen to how Bill O'Reilly addresses Mr. Rhodes.
In the Fact or Follow-Up segment tonight, last night we interviewed Mark Potak from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and he spotlighted a right-wing group called the Oath Keepers that he feels may become dangerous.
But the reality about the group is that what it's really about is the fear that martial law is about to be imposed, that Americans are about to be herded into concentration camps, that foreign troops are going to be put down on American soil.
Joining us now from Washington, Stewart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, who served as a paratrooper in the Army. Tell us about your group, first of all, before we get into the ideology of it. How many people are in the Oath Keepers, and do you have to be a police officer, a law enforcement officer, and an ex-military, or what do you have to be?
Well, if you're going to be a full member, you have to be either current service or prior service, military, police, or firefighters. But we also let average citizens come in as associate members to support our mission. And we have about 15,000 on our forum. About 15,000 on our forums. They're not all actual members, about 6,000 dues-paying members.
Okay. How much is the dues to get in there?
Just a $30 donation. This covers the cost of processing the paperwork. You bet.
And you started this about a year ago. Are you associated with the Tea Party at any level?
Well, I've been to a lot of Tea Party events. We've spoken at quite a few of them, and I'm on the planning committee for the one on 9/11 this next September. so the marchondc.org. But, you know, we like the Tea Party movement. I think it's great. It's a good revitalization of core Americanism and core constitutionalism.
Okay, so full members in the Oath Keepers have to have a military or police background. Now, I'm going to read you something from your website.
Firefighters.
Or firefighters. We will not obey unconstitutional and thus illegal and immoral orders, such as orders to disarm the American people or place them under martial law. Well, who's going to try to disarm people and place them under martial law? I mean, why would that even be something you would be discussing?
Well, it happened as recently as Katrina. You probably have seen the videos there of an old lady being tackled in her kitchen and disarmed with her revolver, and there was house-to-house searches for firearms, and you had the police chief declaring that no one would be allowed to have weapons, we're going to take all the guns, and they did. So they disarmed Americans over some bad weather, as though the bad weather suspended the Second Amendment. So that's the most recent example.
All right, but it was a little bit more than that. I mean, the local authorities in New Orleans could not control what was going on in the city, and you had looters who were armed going in and stealing things, and this directive was...
It wasn't just looters they were disarming. They disarmed average American people, just average American citizens.
No, they had disarmed everybody. They basically said, there's not going to be any guns in the city, and we're going to take them all because we're in a state of emergency. But that's after a hurricane wipes out the city, so I'm not sure. But let me ask you this.
Where's that in the Constitution that says that bad weather suspends the Constitution?
It's not a matter of bad weather. It's a matter of can't control the city. If a mayor of a city or a governor of a state has a state of emergency, all right? And you hear that all the time. We're going to put a state of emergency here. And we have a city that's out of control like we had in the 60s, and you remember some of those riots, I'm sure. And they say, you know, we're going to pause a curfew. You can't go out after 11 o'clock. You can't have a gun out in public. You can't do this. You can't assemble. And, you know, because we have a out-of-control situation. You're telling me that you're going to tell your people not to obey those laws?
I would say that disarming an average law-abiding citizen blanket like that.
No state of emergency. Now, I'm just saying, I'm just talking state of emergency.
Okay, so you call it state of emergency. Call it what you want. It's still unconstitutional.
That's a pretty extreme position. All right, let me ask you about this. You also say we are in a battle for the hearts and minds of our troops. What does that mean?
That means that there is a thought in the minds of some in the military that their oath is just to the president, and they don't understand that their oath is first and foremost to the Constitution. And so we have to make sure they understand that. Because unlike Nazi Germany, where, I mean,
the commander-in-chief
in Germany, the oath is to the Führer.
All right, listen. Commander-in-chief is the president by our Constitution. If he issues an order, are you telling people not to obey the order if they don't like it?
If it's unconstitutional, yes. The oath
whose
is
opinion?
to the
individual soldier? So each soldier makes up his mind whether the order he's given is constitutional or not?
What were the Nazis told at Nuremberg? That disobeying orders was no excuse, no defense. They have an individual obligation, and this is well established in military law.
Okay.
There's an individual obligation.
I know military law, and there are things in there that if a guy says you have to kill those civilians, you say no, we don't. But I'm saying in a general term, I don't think you can have a military or a police force if you have each officer and soldier and Marine saying, we'll obey what order we want because we don't think it's constitutional. That seems to be what you're putting out there. I'll give you the last word on it.
No, here's the thing, Bill, is that there's a presumption that orders are lawful. And so it's a heavy burden to meet. But if you obey an unlawful order, you can also be in trouble. And so they're not going to just go do this lightly. They'll do it when it's most serious, because there is serious repercussions if you disobey a lawful order. But you can be tried and convicted for obeying an unlawful one, too.
If it's clearly unlawful, I got it. But if it's a matter of interpretation, and you could have anarchy easily. But Mr. Rhodes, we appreciate you.
No, you'll have guys who'll be at risk of court-martial. They're not going to do that because they're at risk of court-martial.
All right.
They'll only do it when it's really serious.
The final clip that you're going to listen to is from September of 2014, just a few months ago. And to give you some understanding that if the Republican leadership says this guy has changed from some of the tapes he had earlier, I don't see any change whatsoever in his views. And in his views in this last clip, he was talking at the National Press Club, yet we have received little or no comments from our national media outlets on some of the things he's talking about, and I believe that we need to be thinking seriously, what about law enforcement? We have in Alexandria here a major law enforcement center who we interviewed Scott over there as far as some of the changes or what they are doing after the issues in Ferguson, Missouri. And so I think we need, as we watch this, we need to be talking and challenging our leaders as far as how many of our police, how many of our firefighters, how many of our National Guard members have taken this oath. And I want you to think about the big picture of all the issues Mr. Rhodes has talked about here.
Great, thank you very much. I just thought of something that Ben mentioned, talking about the individual. And we actually teach this at our police academy in Mesa, Arizona. I'm a retired Mesa PD officer. And we tell our recruits, when you are protecting the rights of an individual, even one who has been accused of a crime, you are only protecting your own rights. That's what we're doing, folks. We're pleased now to hear from Stewart Rhodes, Oath Keepers President and Founder. Mr. Rhodes.
Today's Constitution Day, and a few years ago I wrote an essay about Constitution Day, and I asked a question, is this a day of mourning or a day of celebration for their constitutions and a relentless assault? And one of the writer online actually said the Constitution's dead. It's been shot in the face by a shotgun. It's DRT, dead right there. And he's got a point. This government is wildly outside of the Constitution, and so is every level of government all the way down to your local town council. Mr. DeWeese has already pointed out, and others across the country have pointed out before, they're all outside the bounds. But when asked that question, I say no. The Constitution still lives because it still lives inside of our hearts. And all of those of us who have sworn the oath to support and defend the Constitution, whether in military service like I did, or whether the sheriffs, like the good sheriffs who are here today, or chiefs of police, we all took an oath to support and defend. And as long as we still draw a breath, the Republic still lives inside of us. So that's my answer to that. But we do need to understand reality and face the reality that we are in an uphill fight, and it is so wildly outside the bounds that at any time we could have another Lexington Green. It could happen any day. And in the aftermath of Bundy Ranch, I read some analysis by so-called intelligence centers in the counterterrorism intelligence centers in Nevada was one of them, and other places across the country that apparently don't get it. Here's why you had veterans from all over the country jumping in their trucks as individuals, not just Oath Keepers and other groups. We were there too. But there were plenty of guys who all on their own just look and saw what was going on and grabbed their rifle, grabbed their go bag, and jumped in their truck. And why? They told us why when we were there. It was the presence of military snipers, trained special forces snipers that they knew were on the other side, pointing their sniper rifles at a ranching family. That was the number one reason why they rolled out. It was because our government was treating that ranching family with less respect than they would treat someone in Iraq or Afghanistan, where they're still trying to win the hearts and minds. The attitude of the government in this case was, we don't care about winning your hearts and minds, we're going to show you who's boss. Here comes the boot on the back of your neck, and it's wearing a special forces foot inside that boot. That's why. And on our side, and here's the message I have for the federal law enforcement that were there, you need to understand how close you were. It was not going to be a Waco where it's going to be you, well-trained professionals, against untrained men, women, children in a church. It was going to be you against other well-trained American fighters. There was one MARSOC Marine who was there who rolled up. No one even knew he was going to show up. He shows up. He just got out of the Marine Corps. 300 kills in Afghanistan behind a .338 Lapua sniper rifle. And he ran into a young Marine who'd driven down by himself from Oregon who happened to have a .338 Lapua. The MARSOC Marine couldn't afford to own a privately owned .338 Lapua sniper rifle. But when the other Marine veteran found out who this guy was, he said, "This is yours. You take it. Give me your M4." They swapped rifles. So now you had a MARSOC Marine who knew what he was doing on the other side of the scope, looking at those Special Forces veteran snipers. It was going to be sheepdog on sheepdog bloodbath that day. And the why? Because those other oath takers had forgotten their oath. And they had agreed to take the money and go serve as the muscle to treat their own people like an occupied enemy nation. And it's a mirror image. You're going to get what you give. We're going to give you back what you give us. If you deploy the military against us, you will see on the other side guys just like you looking right back at you.
Hear, hear.
And it's the same deal up in New York with the SAFE Act. Same message there to the police of New York. It's like, look guys, it's not the responsibility of the people to bend the knee and submit to an unconstitutional edict from Governor Cuomo and the legislature. You can't tell them, all these oath-sworn veterans, many of whom left brothers on the battlefield, you cannot tell them that in order to avoid violence here at home, you must submit. Bend the knee to the king. Bend the knee and bend your children's knees too. It's not their responsibility to avoid violence, to avoid sheepdog on sheepdog in New York. The responsibility is on the police, the sheriffs, and the deputies of New York to do what's right and refuse to obey those unlawful orders. That is the responsibility. That's the check. That's the safety valve. It's not in submission. It's in devotion and duty of you, the men who are going to be called to act against us, to do what's right and refuse. As long as you refuse, they can't do it without you. You know that. So I had the privilege of riding over here in a car with Sheriff Crepinelli and his wife and kids. Also here is Denny Pyman, an awesome sheriff from Kentucky, who came to Bundy Ranch with us. And that's another good point, as Mr. Pratt was saying earlier. You had Brad Rogers there. He came on our behalf. You had Sheriff Pyman from Kentucky. We also had Jeff Christopher from Delaware show up also. So if we're a bunch of radical, anti-government, crazy cop killers, why were there police officers standing right there with us? It's because we're all in this together. It doesn't matter whether you're a cop or you're a soldier or what your status is. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it's what we will always defend together. If we defend it together, we can avoid bloodshed here at home. But if we allow our police to militarize and turn into an occupying army, or we allow our military to be used here at home domestically against the people, there will be another fight. And there should be. The founders would roll over in their graves and look at us and think, you're going to submit without a fight? Of course there'll be a fight. Just as there was a fight in their day. Just as there was a fight on Iwo Jima and Normandy. We will fight if we have to. But if you do what's right, if you understand your oath, and if you simply respect and obey the Constitution, we don't have to go there. But don't fool yourselves. Don't listen to Southern Poverty Law Center and other nonsense that, oh, we can't tell why they went down there. There's all kinds of crazy crackpot theories. No. It was snipers. It was militarized contractors looking like they just came out of Afghanistan or Iraq. And it was the violation, plain violation of the First Amendment, the big reason why guys showed up. Those ridiculous First Amendment areas where they're told you can have free speech inside this box. Of course, everyone ignored them. All the cowboys there, to their credit, ignored that nonsense. They said, we're not going to comply with that. But that ticked off a lot of veterans. Because they said, what am I fighting for? What did I go and fight for? And one more message for the feds out there. I want you to take a good hard look at who showed up. I want you to think about, number one, how many Marines showed up. And I was Army Airborne, and I'm very proud of that, but I'll tell you what, you got to give credit where credit's due. The Marines showed up en masse. There were more than any other veteran group out there. It was Marine Corps. at Bundy Ranch. And don't think, you feds out there, don't think that the guys who just got out are much different than the guys who are still in. They're of the same mindset. And this is the politicians and your would-be dictators in Washington, D.C., this is what they're worried about. And they should be worried about it. They have to worry that if they go too hard, they drop the hammer too blatantly on Americans like at Bundy Ranch, that the Marine Corps will flip on them. And I think it would. And same goes for the close to the tip of the spear in the Army, Army Airborne, your Special Forces, your Navy SEALs, all those groups out there. The more hardcore they are as warriors, the more likely they are to look at something like that and say, that's it, I'm done, and join the resistance. And so that's why they are careful about what they do. It's not out of charity or concern for your lives that they don't drop the hammer. As we found out later on, they were actually considering a military strike at Bundy Ranch. Can you believe that? Washington Times reported it. They were considering using military force at Bundy Ranch. Thankfully, they did not. Because if they had, that would have kicked off a civil war in this country. It would have. We don't want that. But the way to avoid it, once again, is for those who are in the positions of enforcement, whether federal, state, whether they are in the military, they must refuse to be the muscle for idiots like Cuomo or Obama or Holder who don't understand warfare. Do not open the door on U.S. soil to sheepdog on sheepdog violence. Don't do it. Thank you.
As viewers of Informed TV are individuals that get to see this series of speeches by Mr. Stewart Rhodes, please express your opinion on what you think of his approach to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in relation to the world we live in and the challenges our leaders, whether Republican or Democrat, face in today's world. Pass that on to the Republicans as well as your own elected officials. Thanks for listening to Informed TV. I'm Ellen Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota. You're watching Informed TV, Alexandria, Minnesota.